Hello, my name's Elijah Wells, and today's review is Benny Sadif's new movie, The Smashing Machine. The movie follows mixed martial artist fighter Mike Kerr, who's betrayed by Dwayne Johnson, who pretty much joins into a tournament known as the Pride Fighting Tournament that takes place in Japan. And of course, while taking part in tournaments, he begins to experiment with a lot of steroids and a lot of opiates, and of course has an extremely volatile relationship with his on and on off again girlfriend, being Dawn Staples, being betrayed by Emily Blunt. To describe something volatile, again, it's definitely Dwayne Rock Johnson's career, particularly in this decade, where he has definitely been on a bit of a cold streak as of late. Like, for example, there was Jungle Cruise, which also starred Emily Blunt as well, which unfortunately did really poorly in the box office and, of course, received lukewarm reviews. Not just to mention that the box office was unfortunately hampered by COVID, and as well as the Disney's very bizarre decision to also put this on Disney Plus at the same time as going into cinemas. There was Black Adam, which pretty much killed the DCEU for good. And of course, there was Red One, which was more or less a glorified Christmas special for Dwayne The Rock Johnson, and has Chris Evans and J.K. Simmons here for some reason. So, particularly, it was a massive concern for Dwayne The Rock Johnson, being that he's going to be running that shtick down, being the big buff action hero. He's may have to run it down to the ground, or he's going to have a complete career reinvention as of late, like he did in this movie. And knowing this is a Benny Sadif movie, he did another actor who had a major career reinvention with one of his earlier movies, and of course, that actor is Adam Sandler. In 2019, Benny Sadif, along with his brother Josh, directed the movie Uncut Gems, which stars Adam Sandler as a really slimy jewel salesperson who pretty much has a massive gambling issues and realized he screwed a lot of people over. So, of course, Adam Sandler, who usually plays somewhat man-child goofball, plays a really horribly slimy person. Pretty much goes like Dwayne Rock Johnson. He is willing to do, both actors really wanting to do something that's completely against typecasting. Like, again, with Adam Sandler's case, a goofball, man-child who plays a really greasy, just gross person who just screws a lot of people over. To, again, with Dwayne Rock Johnson, who was this big, buff action man who's completely undefeated, to basically playing a volatile, vulnerable, and pretty much emotionally and mentally tormented athlete in the combat sports arena. It was going to be a very interesting experiment to go around with. Particularly, it's a biopic movie that stars Dwayne Rock Johnson, particularly a sports biopic that's going to be somewhat up in his alley, and given his background as a combat athlete, and as well as being funded by an indie powerhouse, A24. So, again, this wasn't the first time that A24 has done like a sports biopic, and will definitely not be the last. Particularly when I mean last, the director's brother, Josh Sadif, is directing Marty Supreme, which is coming out on Christmas in the UK, which I definitely want to check out. And of course, A24 did release the movie that came out a couple of years earlier, being The Iron Claw, which starred Zac Efron, which is a film I really like. I did a review of it again a couple of years ago, which is again about a wrestler whose world pretty much begins to rapidly crumble around him. And of course, it's about strained families, and of course, the main character who's pretty much way past a mental and emotional breaking point. And of course, a lot of pressures within the athlete a world of like combat sports. For the Iron Claw's case, it's about wrestling, and for the movie Smashing Machine, it's about UFC, but mostly about mixed martial arts sports that pretty much go down that same avenue. I do majorly give credit for Dwayne Rock Johnson for doing something that's completely outside of his own comfort zone, to the point that I'm not sure if it's conspiracy theory or that's something he actually puts in his own contract, that he must not be defeated in a fight, and when someone hits him, it must be like equal damage. So essentially, it could go to the point that his big buff action man shtick is getting a little bit tiresome for a lot of movie-going audiences, considering that his past movies, like I did mention earlier in his films, were doing pretty mediocre numbers in the box office and pretty much getting middling reviews from critics. And so much so, he pretty much plays not just a really volatile, but downright a vulnerable and completely broken version of himself that pretty much is like doped up on a lot of steroids and a lot of opiates and a lot of painkillers, and pretty much has really aggressive mood swings that just move on a dime, and has some really heated and downright explosive altercation with his girlfriend, being portrayed by Emily Blunt, who's incredible, who, although does appear somewhat sporadically and sparsely in this movie, she is actually really good in that movie, like performance-wise, Emily Blunt. Yeah, considering the past collaborations they both had in Jungle Cruise. And again, the movie, I do want to give praise to the movie beyond the redemption arc that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is going through. The things I do really like about the movie, besides the acting, is definitely the fight choreography. Again, the movie is essentially about Mark Kerr, who's a mixed martial artist, and who pretty much partakes in the UFC, as well as the Pride tournaments in Japan, where he goes back and forth from US and Japan for. And the fight choreography is very brilliant, and it does, particularly one scene where someone explains the rules a little bit, particularly when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson meets up with a kid in a hospital waiting room, and pretty much explains it to, I'm assuming, the kid's grandma or something, or just a relative or something. And pretty much explains like it's basically a mixture of like boxing, wrestling, martial arts, and jiu-jitsu and all that, and seeing which is the best like fighting style. Again, surprisingly no reference to Joe Rogan, but I imagine he either comes into the picture a little bit later or he's somewhat instrumental in the movie, but again, no mention of him either. But again, the fight choreography in this movie is pretty brutal and pretty great as well, particularly as it taps into that rule again about the mixed martial arts and MAA and UFC, particularly in seeing where he complains to one of the referees in the match when he actually gets kicked in the head repeatedly, and that he sorts out as a violation of like the rules. And of course, in the earlier scene where they do talk about like no-goes in the in the tournament, like eye gouging and like anything that involves like something getting gouged or something. Again, some really interesting stuff, even though I don't watch a lot of combat sports on TV, on YouTube, but again, very interesting insight from for me as well. Okay, moving past the Marco's really volatile relationship with his girlfriend, also his relationship he has with Coleman, his fellow fighter that he often teams up with, particularly throughout the Pride tournaments in Japan. Again, they both have like really good chemistry. Of course, all wrestlers are depicted by wrestlers, and of course, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, even though he's definitely still one of the biggest film stars of all time, he's all we'll just put as that he has still has like combat sports experience along with like John Cena and Dave Bautista. Again, we should never forget that he pretty much had that experience as well, and how he pretty much transformed that into that again really great movie he's already pumping out. Particularly with Ben Sandeeves, who had of course won the Best Director award at the Venice Film Festival where the film premiered. He does definitely had some incredible directing work up in his sleeves, like Good Times, and of course with Uncut Gems, and of course his brother's other work, Josh Sandeef, who's directing a film being Marty Supreme. Again, I feel like he's definitely moving up in the game, particularly how he exploded into the indie scene, or at least got into my radar with Uncut Gems, and how really well received it is, and how, again, like the similar idea of like an actor who's starting to fade and pretty much had a major reinvention, and pretty much it's just a really well directed movie, and how he used that idea again as well of using a typecast actor to be essentially retooled into something somewhat completely different as well. It's like having Taylor Swift making her next album being on the same avenue, let's say Lingua Ignota or Evil Kane, as in much more intense and much more grim. It seems like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is on the roll with this one. He may be up to something with this one, like Particularly, I've said already about him reinventing and want to be taken a bit more seriously after some box office duds. Well, this is a movie that definitely shows the world that he definitely really does have potential. Particularly, he could be tipped for an Oscar nomination for all we know, but I'm hoping that does come to fruition. And of course, there's the incredible fight choreography, the performances of Emily Blunt, who's also great in this movie as the girlfriend who feels like somewhat sideline on Mark Kerr's adventures, and pretty much gets into some really explosive arguments about it. Again, some really tender performances from her. Particularly the on and off romance that's depicted throughout the movie, and of course the really insane fight choreography, particularly we see briefly in his training sessions, and as well as his fights in the Pride tournament in Japan. Again, it does go to show that even though, despite being the biggest box office success, he still needs to be grounded in the more indie films, particularly the movies that wouldn't make sense to make $1 billion. Well, it makes more sense to be have a much more bigger appreciation for critics and fans alike. So, for The Smashing Machine, I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on this one. So, what do you think of The Smashing Machine? Let me know in the comments down below. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Blue Sky, and Threads, and this is Elijah Walls, and bye.